Are you tired of simmering bolognese for hours or waiting around for a cottage pie? Or just want something other than the usual burger? Try Danish Hakkebøf, ground beef patties topped with caramelized onions and drenched in a rich brown gravy. One of the Danish classics, simple, hearty and affordable. Served with boiled potatoes and pickled beets. We will start by peeling and cutting our onions, as these take the longest to cook. You can remove both ends of the onions since we're not going to finalize them, and cut them in half. And don't be afraid of using a lot of onions. I know it looks like a ridiculous amount at first, but trust me, these things shrink like crazy. We're going to cook down the onions quite a bit, so cutting with or against the grain barely makes a difference. I prefer with the grain since it's a bit easier. Feel free to use any color onion you have on hand, as it won't make much of a difference, except in appearance. I think red onions tend to become too dark, making it hard to judge caramelization levels, but they still taste great. If you want my recommendation, go with standard yellow onions. They taste amazing, so they serve 2 adults who like to help themselves with a little extra onion, with just a little left over for lunch next day. A knob of butter goes into the pan on medium heat. I used around 50 grams. Once it's melted and bubbling nicely without browning, add the onions. For some reason I enjoy smacking the onions a bit. I'm not entirely sure if this does anything. Add a crack of salt to help draw out moisture and speed up the caramelization. You can also add a splash of water to help soften the onions first. But I think salt alone is fine, especially if you're not in a hurry and have a bunch of patties to shape. Keep an eye on them and stir frequently. They burn easily. If some onions char a bit, don't worry, they taste amazing too. We are aiming to soften the onions and give them some color. Meanwhile, prepare the beef patties. First, I section my meat into roughly 6 equal parts. Right, some of mine are obviously a bit bigger, but that's okay. I take a portion of meat and shape it into a rough ball. Then, I flatten it between both hands, turning it around while keeping the sides tucked in with my thumb. I also flatten it on the cutting board, pushing more aggressively while still keeping the edges in mind. Make the patty flatter than you think. It will thicken as it cooks because the muscle fibers contract when heated. Continue shaping until your patty looks something like this, then repeat for however many times you need. Remember to wash your hands between touching the raw beef and stirring the onions. Notice how I'm only using my left hand to touch the raw meat and keeping my right hand clean for seasoning. For a reason I'm not entirely sure of, but we do it anyway. Smack each side of the patty with the edge of a knife. We do this in Denmark, so we do it on YouTube as well. Set them aside and finish the onions. When the onions are nearly done, add freshly ground black pepper and mix well. You could stop here and have amazing onions, but I like caramelizing mine a bit further and then adding a splash of balsamic vinegar for a slight tang. After adding the balsamic vinegar and black pepper, stir a bit, remove the onions from the pan. Leave all the good stuff stuck to the bottom. If there is a lot, you can scrape the pan a little to prevent burning, or deglaze with a tiny splash of water before adding the butter. Add a bit of butter for frying. Pan on fairly high but not full blast. This is around 7-8 out of 9 on my stove. Sear the patties, preferably 2 or 3 at a time. I was a bit impatient and added 4 at once and then 2 at the end. Overcrowding the pan traps steam and prevents a proper sear, which is why mine didn't get as crispy as they should have. It also doesn't help that my stovetop is a tad undersized for my pan, meaning it heats unevenly and struggles to keep up with 4 cold patties at once. The patties don't need to cook through at this stage. They'll finish simmering in the sauce. Mine were quite raw, so I simmered them for about 5 to 7 minutes. If you cook yours through in the pan, that's still good. You don't have to add them to the sauce. Deglaze the pan with stock, preferably beef, but chicken works too. I didn't have a proper beef stock, so I dissolved a beef stock cube in 500 ml of water beforehand. Scrape up all the good bits from the pan and bring the sauce to a small boil. Slowly add about 2 tablespoons of cornstarch dissolved in water while stirring constantly. Add it too aggressively and the sauce might thicken too fast to control. 2 tablespoons ended up being a bit much, so I thinned it out with a couple splashes of water, ideally from the boiling potatoes. If you're adding heavy cream like I do, keep the sauce slightly thicker than your target consistency at this stage. Taste for seasoning as you go. Once the sauce is just about right, lower the heat, add the heavy cream. A generous amount of freshly ground black pepper and adjust the seasoning if needed. If you have sauce coloring on hand, a small amount deepens the color and adds a slight bitterness. You don't need it for an amazing sauce, it's just a common Danish trick. Be careful though, too much turns the sauce very dark and overpoweringly bitter. If you've never seen it before, It's ammoniated caramelized sugar, labeled E150C in Europe. Do a final taste test, adjust if necessary, and add your patties back in and then simmer. There is no right or wrong way to plate food, but at least trying makes a difference. We eat with our eyes first, and even if it ends up looking like a mess, the effort alone makes it feel more satisfying. Worst case, it still tastes the same. There's something about beef, onions and rich gravy that just makes sense. No wonder this dish has stuck around for generations. I like adding a splash of heavy cream to the gravy. Some people use mustard. But you can also keep it simple with just beef stock, potato water and a thickener. This version is just the way I like it. Rich, savory and straight to the point. And a little extra black pepper at the end, because that's how my mom did it. Thank you for watching and subscribe.